Welcome to episode 2 from third season. And this is the A block, so I'll actually record the B block and the C block separate from this. So you know. And you're like, what are you talking about, sir? What is this block shit you're talking about? And I'm like, literally subsections. Like I started last season, if whoever listened actually went along with it, and it was a ramble. I ramble. I rant like a lunatic. Actually, you're lucky I'm not standing up while doing this, which I'm trying to arrange for, because the energy would just be bolting out of me. And I shit you not. That's a thing. Like, it's why stand-ups do stand-up. People do speeches stand-up. Same basic shit. Same basic idea. So anyway, which way? The setup I created, I realized like working through the material for season 2, I had to subdivide everything like they did in season 1. Now, we are on, I think like, this is 28 episodes. If you look at the whole collection together. I took a break because I had to do a bunch of shit. Life and life stuff. So, there's a few things I have to address. One of the things I had to address is the fact that there are currently protests going on. This is being recorded at the end of October, so you'll be hearing this next month, actually. So I like the fact that people are actually taking the way you're supposed to protest and demonstrate. Actually, I'm going to focus more on the demonstration concept. The mockery on parade concept, because that makes more sense. That's what makes this shit fun. Okay? And that's what adds levity to everything. Humor, comedy adds levity. Actually, if anything, you watched some of our larger icons kind of get targeted. Colbert and Kimmel for speaking out and doing the comedian's job. And currently right now you're hearing a bunch of comedians, some of my favorite comedians, catching shit for going to Saudi Arabia. I kind of agree with it. Like, that's weird. You can make money. You don't need to go somewhere else to make money specifically there. And that's a thing, right? So you're seeing the fine line of parameters of comedy, levity, and analysis, because that's what comedians really genuinely do. I will say random shit and try to set up a punchline and whatnot. I'm not a comedian at all. I have a sense of humor, but that's pretty much about the size of it. I never preached that I'm doing stand-up at all. I'm like the anti-version of that. Any which way. There is a tactic to explain to you in the last season that needs to be done. So I'm going to use the litmus of the 60s, because the strikes and protests earlier on, which can get heated and out of fucking pocket and violent really quick. There's a contrast, because a lot of the demonstrations from the 60s were genuinely mockery. The messaging's there, which is very fucking important. You have to understand why the mockery is taking place, and it has to be on display, and it has to be followed through, right? I think when we think of the 60s, we think of like 68 Democratic Party, DNC thing in Chicago. Mayor Daley fucking sending a goon squad down there to fuck shit up, right? Rightfully so, because shit got out of pocket in that area, right? The best famous Netflix piece, and actually, I would advise you even go beyond that pale and read a lot about it. So, Chicago 7, 8, but Bobby Seale pulled out, is a really important topic, because the film also illustrates the fact Sacha Baron Cohen. There's a lot of people in the film. It's on Netflix. I advise you to watch it, because it gives you stuff like that. Gives you like a quick piece, a broad stroke to then analyze and read up on further in detail, so you understand exactly what took place. It was basically a political trial, but there's a lot of shit that happened in Chicago, 68, clearly, right? So that's kind of the illustrated piece. Like chaos. Mockery is chaos, but it's constructive and creative. Okay? And we should diligently be on that. I mean, you can be the doom and gloom structure because shit is not right now. Here's what's funny. Shit hasn't been right since the 60s. And the more analysis I do of this, I realize there was a lot of shit that happens. Now, next episode, I'm going to explain 3. I will explain my model to understand the difference between conspiracy theory and speculation. Because educated guesses, hypothesis, and speculation fall under one umbrella. Conspiracy theory kind of mirrors aspects of it. And I will get into that in episode 3 because I realized last season that I had to really kind of like think of a very strong model in order to express what I'm looking at and how some conspiracy theory I will just listen to. And I'll go in a core, out of core, right? You know, like, what do you mean by that? Don't you believe in this fucking book? Hey, it is what it is. Somebody's speculating something and maybe you throw in a hypothesis out. But if the numbers aren't there, then it's not there. Like, you have to give me a lot of raw data. In order for something to become fact and become standard, there has to be a form of measurement. And that is the contrast. And they'll be like, yeah, but this thing over here, I don't care. It's like the alien thing. Don't really give a fuck. Don't care. What? But does you're right. And there may have been an event at some point in time. But I am not that dude. I'm not that going down that fucking rabbit hole. I'll listen to it. I'll check it out. It's interesting. Why? Because I like sci-fi, right? But I'm not going to run into that situation going, oh, you know, there's a bunch of people with like, you know, lizard people. Just not that person. So anyway, I'm going to get into that in 3. What I brought up last season was that vote with your dollar. And I went a little beyond the pale, and I actually might end up appearing on something I'm going to do, hopefully good. It should be released next year. And a lot of that was explaining how much power collectively we have. And I get into some weird numbers, just showing you that we are the conveyors of capital. What do you mean? We transfer, we create the debt, and we create the money. We disperse the commerce throughout the whole country, the whole world, actually. And we don't hold that high. We don't even realize we're doing it. It's an unconscious thing, inconspicuous, right? So the more we think about it, and the more you analyze it, you realize how much power you have. Like, the one thing that was funny in the early 2Ks is the flash mobs. People will show up random places and overwhelm places because they're showing up to go to a movie theater. You know, they're not expecting 40 people to show up that all interconnected and know each other. You know, I used to do this when I was young in the 90s, right? Someone would hit 32. So 32 people would show up at a random movie theater or a random club or a random place. And that's overwhelming. It's a heavy amount to add to already a large collection. And people that know each other. So it's automatically, the social glue is there. So the boundaries of like social anxiety doesn't necessarily exist. You're already there. You already know each other. And you're already, you know, riffing on each other. Like, there's already like culture automatically ingrained, right? And this is the why, like, you know, when Cool Hunters and whatever they call them now go examine scenes, that's one of the things they measure, right? That's a thing. So in which way? So I suggested last season, and this is the reason why people wanted me to start recording these things. And I'm presenting these things, and I obviously don't have a large audience. Don't really give a fuck. It's kind of one of those things I've had to think about. Well, I'm not necessarily doing this for profit at all. I'm just kind of doing this because it makes sense for me to do it. And it took a long time, over 30 people, to kind of motivate me to get behind this. And a lot of it is because the things I was talking about back then seem to come to fruition. They seem to show up, and that's part of the model I was discussing. So even though I may not make any sense to you right now, and let's say it's the first time you listen to my shit, eventually I'm going to start making sense. Eventually the things are going to click. Because your thinking about this stuff is not the same way I think about this stuff. And I think about this stuff a lot. Because life gives us a lot to deal with, right? Authoritarians don't like mockery. Bottom line, they want obedience and fear. And when you're like, the fear thing has worn me down. We have generations and generations of people, workers, getting shit on. And when we gained control of the economy back in 2013, 2014, right? And we started getting more. Now, here's what's weird. Again, I'm going to say this. This applies to blue states. I'm not sure about the red states. And in Fear and Loathing in the Campaign Trail 72, Chapter 28 says something about the South, which I never really necessarily considered. I know their push there is to constantly have trickle-down structures, if they can implement them. I think it's harder in the major cities. Trickle-down structure is basically blowjob economy. That's what I call that. Because it's like, we put money up. We are the, owners of whatever said property. We dictate work. And you don't want to do the work and show us your money and shake it for us. We can turn that tap off at any point in time. And that's why that shit's dangerous as fuck. Why? Because we have several generations right now of trickle-down philosophy, and it amounts to shit. So when we gain control of it, the funny thing about it is the larger mass media didn't seem to talk about it at the time. And they haven't really. Periodically, they address it. Rare if you hear somebody say something about this, right? But we still have that at this point in time. That hasn't been pulled away from us. The red states, not as much. I think they always lived off many aspects of maybe a trickle-down model. They have to analyze it themselves. I honestly don't know. I've lived in red states, but I remember the hard worship for wealthy people. They're like, oh, they're like demigods. Cool, they exist. So be it. How does that influence the everyday? But the problem is they allow them to influence the everyday. They don't want to live here. They don't have to live here. We can exist. We generate more capital if we really wanted to. If that was the case, then they wouldn't even require our services as much. There's a fine line right there, what I'm saying. Any which way, bottom line, authoritarians hate mockery. And that is a thing. So the more you have demonstrations that are just fun and send the message straight through, the more effective they are. However, authoritarians hate them. And that's all I'm going to say about that. The other thing I'm going to bring up, it was Tilly Norwood, the AI-generated actress. Hopefully I'm saying that right. Norwood. It's funny because this is a thing that's happening right now. So now we want to replace the arts. We want to create money gates, paywalls for all random services. I'm not sure how much the Toyota thing is true, but they're doing that with that. And even the game industry kind of fucking shit on itself because they're like, we'll give you this game, but you want this, you need to spend that. You want this, so we're creating different social classes have access to different game performances. That is fucking nonsense, but that's what's being cooked up for us, right? There's a lot of designs happening all at once. Why? Because we have capital. They wouldn't be doing this shit if they didn't think we have disposable income. That is the truth. And the people that should be safeguarding this stuff aren't. They're too busy saying, we want monarchy or whatever fucking nonsense they want. We want the whole place to be rigged in order for our favor, because you guys are making way too much money. This improves upon what I was saying to you earlier. Well, which way? This AI-generated actress is a thing. And it's interesting because chronologically challenged people that were born, especially Gen Z and later millennials, That's correct. May not remember this. Well, there was a movie called Final Fantasy, and I think it's Spirit Within, or something like that. Came out in early 2Ks. When this movie came out, and I want to say I've already covered this topic, but because they're pushing the AI, non-real, living, breathing actors, and they're pushing this concept a little further. I just find the whole fucking thing strange, like, because we don't want you as humans, love or engage the arts. You can pay attention to your sports, but only as a fan, really. Or you can try the lottery system and just destroy everything of your social life and marry onto the system and destroy your body in order to maybe become a person, an athlete. Because we'll allow that. But the arts seem to be, it's cool when you're young, right? Think about this for a second. We don't want you to have hobbies. We don't want to engage. We don't want to be critical thinking. Like, this is the messaging, not necessarily outright said, but always implied in the material, right? So this movie came out, and there was general discussions in pop culture then. So early 2Ks, if you were really young, you may want to look up on this, because obviously the internet was active, so you should be able to find data about this. And the bold statement that this could replace actors, right, was fucking horrifying. Like, what? What? The culture was like, yeah, no, it's not going to happen. Now, fuck that, right? And that was the general response. And when these bold statements are made, right? Because remember, like, little dial back to trickle-down economics, that kind of got us into the Depression. Way back in the day, that model of, like, giving them all the money to the rich because they're, they know better. They know the secret codes and stuff. And you'll get it. No, that doesn't happen. That fucking tanks the economy. I send this pretty much in the Depression. But yet we'll keep massaging this idea over and over and over and over again, and then we get Reagan economics, right? And what ended with that? End of the decade, Black Tuesday. Fucked up everything, especially the coasts of the country. Hard fucking recession. So the ideas will be thrown out there and shopped around to see how much they can get away with it. And they gradually will massage you, depending on your echo chamber, into what you should be thinking. Because we want to get rid of critical thinking. We want to get rid of anything related to this, right? So this notion from Final Fantasy, nothing against on Final Fantasy. You want to do your fucking movie. It is what it is. I watched it. I'm like, this is shit, right? I looked at it like a cartoon. That's how I looked at it. The thought hadn't even crossed my head that, hey, wait a second, they want to replace actors, until it was talked about actively. Like, this was a thing. And the general audience response is like, fuck no. Right? And they massaged these ideas using, this led to a lot of more advanced motion capture and a lot of the CGI you have now. So it was kind of like a forgotten about thing. I was in a social circle recently. I mentioned this movie once I heard about the AI, the Tilly Norwood thing. And I said, so this is now, they felt they massaged it enough to have fake actors, like people that don't really exist. But then the whole are we living in a simulation? Stop that for a second. No, but the goal is, the way I look at it this way is when somebody must have rapidly jacked off the Matrix screenplay. We can make a fake world. Yeah, and fucking just launching into the socks. But I'm thinking to myself, this is a thing. So how do we implement this idea into the larger grid? Right? The problem with sci-fi, especially modernist or the ones that you can actually see advance forward. There's a term for it. I can't remember the term right now. Like when you watched Blade Runner back in '82, and you're like, I can see society becoming like that over time. Yeah, because it seems realistic. It's just more advanced. The ideas are already existed, just moving forward, right? So that's the thing. The problems with that are any of the crazy maniacal plans to do stuff seem to be a dual-edged sword. Like, I have this as an idea, let's run this as a theory, and we'll dress it in the framework of fiction. And we'll implement these ideas. So they'll do this, and there's already an angle. And not all the time when you see the stuff, because it's being, do I want to say marketed? That's being really cynical. It's being presented. So you're making the judgment. Now, when it's being presented, do you see the upside? No. All the time, yes. And the ones that are responsible when they make their fiction are showing you the downside also. That's usually the better creatives. They're showing you the angle of the plus and the minuses. The ones that just show you the upside create that. I can be cynical about that. That means they're trying to inject something, an idea into something, right? So now we have the idea that we cannot engage as human beings into the artistic structure. A structure that has created a series of numerous fucking gatekeepers. Numerous. In order to block people and to basically fill them with doubt and kill any dreams or aspirations they may have. Why? Because if these people keep aspiring and keep creating and get money, because that's the only reward we seem to have in society, right? Or get noticed. And it's interesting because noticing also fucks with the zeitgeist concept, right? Which eventually I'm going to address at some point in time. I'm still kind of analyzing it, and I'm collecting notes on it. But let's say if they just go up one tier in the zeitgeist, and let's say neighborhoods or people are into certain styles, you find this in music, in niche music, right? There's some brands I listen to that I present to people. They're like, "Where'd you hear this from?" I just happened ear. I listened to enough music over time that I can just quickly analyze the stuff. Going, that might be something interesting to check out. I'll check it out. Yay or nay, right? Give it some shelf time. Yay or nay, right? And then if I'm selling it to you or I'm presenting this idea to you, hey, check this out. I've already engaged in it enough, right? So I'm kind of playing not a gatekeeper, because I'm not stopping people from going into something, but I'm presenting an idea, right? And that's how word of mouth works, right? And that's the strongest, till today, the strongest form of advertisement. It's a natural advertisement, right? Because people are social. So the idea with this is that we massage ideas into the culture. And the ones that are just kind of doing dirty are kind of presenting it as almost a self-fulfilled prophecy. Like, we want it to be like this. We want artificial life. Why? Because it's much easier to control and it's cheaper for our bottom line. And we want you to be isolated in your situation so much so that we can turn your enjoyment of life off and on anytime we want, almost like a trick dollar model. So it's entertainment. We can turn the entertainment off and on. Okay? We only want you to invest in our artists that we've contracted to the point where they can't shit sideways unless they ask us, or we have all these weird overbearing appearances they have to do. They have to keep this aesthetic. Like, this is a thing. And it seemed to get worse over time, especially when they realize they can get them on the Spotify and like, wait a second, you just bashed one of the formats you're in. I don't give a fuck, right? I could do this live, but I haven't. But I will. Actually, if you talk to me randomly like a normal person, I do. You ask me the questions, I'm going to give you the answers the best I know. And I'll tell you that. Hey, that's how I'm perceiving it. Doesn't make it so. And that is the thing. It doesn't make it so. But there's enough evidence supporting this. And it's all context. So the person's injecting these ideas of AI and pushing it. The paywalls, the blockage, the fucking around with technology. Again, it comes back to what I said to you last season. If we step back or minimize our use of all tech for 3 to 5 years, shit is fucking humbled. What are you going to do? Go to government saying, you have to mandate that they do this at this point in time, or we're going to fucking what? What? You're going to lose money, dude. That's all you're going to do. Lose tons and tons of money. I still believe in the fact that their hands are sore as fuck from bleeding stones. And this is why they're creating all these weird barriers. We have the power right now. And people are in areas, you have to recognize whether you're in trickle-down structure or not. Because if you're not getting money or being able to make money or jobs not available, you're in a weird part of the country. You're in a part of the country that's probably really, really, really fucking controlled. And you don't even realize it. And this is why you live in your echo chamber. Right? I've been around those circles. I've been around that thinking, that school of thought. I challenge them constantly, perpetually, because it has to be. And you're like, well, you must be a Democrat. No, I do have a tendency to vote independent and Democrat. Yeah. But for the most part, I'm not, because I know the blue dog's just as bad. They're the ones that seem to be holding the pillow while you're being fucked. And it's funny because every so often when shit like this happens right now, you're watching that expose itself. Why? Because both parties are paid. They've been paid since the late 70s. And last I checked, I want to say there's more independent voters than party members. And I'm more for that than not. But if you're going to be independent, that means you have to really critically think about fucking everything. Okay? It means you have to work against your thing. So the Taylor Norwood thing is interesting because it's from Final Fantasy, and I'm not even saying the movie itself or the game system itself said, hey, we can replace. I'm not implying that. The media blitz at the time was suggesting it. And I'm like, that is fucked up. Right? Then, I still think it's fucked up now. But currently, right now, we have an AI power grab. Right? One of the largest ones. And a lot of it to keep us humble. Like, to put us back in our fucking places. And that seems to be the thing. Why? Because if you have all of this exhaust all of the jobs, which they don't have workers for, it's like the reverse opposite. Like, wait, a recession means there's no jobs. You're right. But there's jobs. And they're paying reasonable amounts of money. So, explain this to me. How is this not adding up to our previous... Well, you don't understand, and fucking just more cow shit on your fucking face. And no, that's not how it's been. We grind. Normal workers grind as a motherfucker. I don't care if you're higher up or not. You grind. And you get paid per hour to grind. Once you hit a certain class and work status, they change your structure to give you, what, the salary thing? So what, you can work more for the same fucking money? Logic. Doesn't make any fucking sense, right? But they eventually marry people to this idea. This is a thing in the workforce. If you're younger, don't know this, yeah. There is a management position at some point in time will say, well, we'll give you this amount of money, and they'll try to sell you to it, massage you, and maybe, fucking, I don't know what they do. They have you in a cult meeting, whatever fuck nonsense they have, because they don't want to pay you overtime. And at the same point in time, they don't want you to get another job to make up. So if they cut overtime, you have money. Like, the whole thing's fucked up. So anyway, artificial life in the marketplace, like Operation Ivy, right? That's what's going on. the push for this is to fucking elbow human beings into a corner and get back to where you're supposed to be at. Don't be in the streets demonstrating. I mean demonstrating. I mean mocking the system in which you're living in right now. Don't be trying to build underground structures. You kind of forced that in 98. So the aqueduct system exists, and it honestly was running relatively well, unbeknownst to most of us, until now you're starting to fill it. Because now you're trying to block people. Like, the more people you take from the top, you think that their popularities are to go away? If anything, you made them more of a rebel. You think about your fucking models that you market everything to. You know, if Kimmel got pulled off air, he would have a large fucking audience waiting for him. Especially now. Are you fucking stupid? Just plain and simple. Think about the logic behind that. You know, I'm not even a big fan of his. But the fact that happened is fucked up. Right? And people, especially Gen Xers, we've seen all this bullshit before. Right? And the generation before us, like, I'm covering the same part 2 of this in this episode. The generation before, the Joneses, they were birthed into it. Shit, again, I told you last episode, they grew up and they're watching political leaders die and movements being killed and waves of heroin showing up and fucking up any social circles. Because bottom line, opioids fuck everything up. And that's typical. Art scenes, music scenes, it makes people fucking zombies. And it erodes society. And you're like, that's a hard fucking angle. Your hard stance against junkies. There's a difference between junkie and an addict. Right? The junkie doesn't give up. I'm going to get mine. Addict says, I don't really want to be doing this. Two fundamental differences. Right? Junkie's the asshole of the world. Addicts aren't. They really want to get this shit together. I'll even go a bolder statement beyond that. People seek drugs out, whether legal or not, legal or illegal, because they're not fucking right, or they feel the world that they're dealing with is not fucking right, but they need to figure out how to adjust to it. And that's why you have the rise of these random fucking things. Opioids gain a lot of footing because of injuries. Early 2Ks, you can have a wrist hurt, something very basic, go into a fucking doctor, and they're like, Vicodin. You know, just scripts shooting out of their fucking sleeves. And this was a going joke for a period of time. Now you have a large epidemic. You know, if they can't get the scripts anymore, what are they doing? And then you have heroin or any type of opioid on the street that's cheaper. Yeah, this is all sorts of fucked up. And this has been around for quite some time. It's just now affecting a larger broadband of the country. But this was epic. Like in the late 60s, interesting enough, heroin starts showing up at a large fucking rate. Right? I'm making these connections like studying music, rock history. Because I still can't figure out what happened in the mid-70s. Something happened in the mid-70s that really kind of... It's the only reason why Kiss became really... I don't care if Ace Frehley just died. What do you call it there? Why Kiss became so fucking popular. Or like weird bands like that just started showing up. Like the Eagles. What the fuck? Really? You know, be like, well, that's terrible. They're great bands. You have Led fucking Zeppelin. That is the litmus right there. That's out of nowhere, just dominating. And you're going to give me this? This is you have the Stooges. What? It's plain and simple. And if you're like arguing, well, you know, you have the Eagle, Neil Young. There's a lot of things that happened that I can't explain the mid-70s at all. There's so much suppression in the mid-70s. It's so fucking crazy. And when the shit spills out, they're like, well, we need to, you know, doctor it up and make it new wave. Really crazy history. So what heroin starts showing up a lot, right? And it's funny because, again, the Hunter S. Thompson book, he mentioned that drugs weren't doing the thing that they should be doing. So people are like, I want to get fucking high and fucked up. There you go. And all of a sudden you have a bunch of the first hard wave since what? The Second World War or First World War of new addicts. Right? Because morphine was the big thing back in the day. And then again, you have that carries on to the 80s, which is fucking horrendous. Right? And then all of a sudden you have black tar heroin and you have the cheap heroin and after the whole fucking invasion of Iraq. You have heroin cheaper than fucking you had it in the late 60s. That's crazy. That's absolutely fucking insane. But that's the thing. So take that in consideration. Take what I'm saying in consideration. The AI thing's a fucking the hardest fucking power grab I've seen in a long time. And people are just eating the shit up in a fucking weird ass way. I don't understand it. If it requires, here's another thing. If you're a creative, right? Maybe consider the idea that there were older cameras and that electronic tape existed. Or there's the old mediums in which artists would flourish. There is hard history of this. The one thing you got to take in consideration, if you're under the age of 35 right now, go back to read old books. Go back to learn how the other artists did it before. Because that method could still be used no matter what. Here's what's funny. They sell you on the idea of tech. And I know I'm introducing this, I'm recording this on this shit. I would run a reel to reel, right? And the weird gateway to this is I can take this, record this, and push it out there, right? The old school method of doing this would be mixtapes, right? Or AM radio, which Republicans jumped the fuck on, right? Honestly, underground structures, just random lecture pieces, spoken word, right? This is how it was originally done. And when I started doing this, I accepted the fact that if I'm going to do this fully, I'm going to have to do all of this stuff. Initially, it came from books, but guess what? Now all of a sudden, banning books again at a rapid, fucking crazy, cancerous rate. But that's a thing. Why? We don't want any dissenting opinions to be easily accessible, thus motivating the underground. Artists thrive off of artists. Here's the clincher right here. Don't overshoot what you're worth. Meaning that if you're a great craftsman and you know what the fuck you're doing, then charge the money. Don't go, hey, I just shot on a piece of paper and I'm going to sell you this for $1,000. Don't be that person. Be your own quality control. It does require you, as a creative, to tighten the fuck up and be realistic. Right? And here's what's sad. It sounds crazy. It sounds like I'm undermining you. I'm not. Punk rock is the best opening for this, and I can cover that history relatively well. It showed you that passion over technique motivates. It shows you that you can do, and you will get really good at it. And then the accolades will come. One of the bands, Peter Criss, don't give a fuck. I have a hard opinion about Kiss, right? Always have. Once I understood the concept of like what they did and basically gave marketing instant access to rock music, the music that if you refine it and reduce it and make it raw, is the music of rebellion. Period. It is more of a phoenix than people realize. So of course, when we put artists on command, we overproduce them so they can't get the same thing. But there is a push right now for artists to go back to old school methods. Thus, me telling you this advice. Build the underground. Build a network structure. Share ideas with each other. Because that will transcend. You will get the accolades on a long enough timeline. Just be diligent, right? It doesn't matter about exposure. The zeitgeist is the beast created by the media. It's designed in order to give you whatever profit they feel like you deserve at that point in time. Hasn't there been artists that you realize got too much money for something, but yet didn't get enough money for a period of time they were working on stuff? Again, they will be rewarded at some point in time. So I will tell you, again, before I end this block, and eventually go back to the generations piece, step back. Try to figure out methods you can do the old way and get really good at them. And I guarantee you, at this point in time in history, it'll be a lot easier too. Reviewing. Yeah, I just took a large breath and you're like, what are you doing? Reviewing the initial notes from the last episode. This is Generations Part 2. And I'm just going to cover the overarching generations up to this point. And the reason why is because there's a whole other episode. Things like, I think, an hour and 38 minutes, something like that. Get into it. Could be less, actually. I'm not 100% sure. Boomers. From 44 to 46 is when they kind of show up. Give a two-year window. Mainly because depending on what part of the country you are in, or what type of situation you're in, if you're in a city, a suburb, a rural area, a really far out, like on a bank of nowhere, you run into that situation, right? So development, a lot of it is socialization. So you're interacting with people, you're defining yourselves in contrast to whatever previously existed with you. Changes have been made, so it's now affecting you. Like, one of the interesting factoids about the situation is the American teenager, right? That's not an idea that goes before the 20th century. Unless you're really privileged, but even then they didn't necessarily identify it as a teenager, right? You're like, wait a second, those teen years still exist. You're right, but guess what? Once you're done with 8th grade, you can tackle the world. Secondary school is secondary school, right? So that's high school. Typically people paid for that. Then at some point in time, it became a public thing, right? Old systems, like where I grew up, archaic as fuck, but where I grew up, you have a lot of schools that reached over to 8th grade. Like they would go literally from 1st grade to 8th grade. Kindergarten wasn't a thing way back in the day. So that was it. That was your primary education. That's why it's called primary school, right? Secondary was the high school, and the high school married you into an vocation, something to that effect. That engine, throwing that into the mix, changed everything. So it affected the generations. Simple things like that. You're now facing things that you didn't face, your parents didn't face before. That's a thing. So providing that 2-year leeway, the generations transition in such a way that is natural. It's organic, right? You could probably go 3 years if you really wanted to argue this. Because the one thing I did notice about Gen Z is that depending on where you fell in that bracket, depending on how COVID affected you. Like one person said, literally went from 6th grade to high school. My attitude, my mindset was not prepared for that at all. Not even academically was I fully proficient at what I was doing. I thought that was really interesting, just in general. So boomers are from 44 to 46 to about 54, 56. So they're doo-wop, there's a bunch of things that really affected them. Maybe even early rock, proto-rock, R&B, like genuine rhythm and blues. So you have Generation Jones from 54, 56 definitely celebrating that first wave of rock. So to 64, 66, you have what I classify right now Generation X subsection 1. Why? I'm going to get to that. So you have 64 to 66 to 74, 76. Again, depending where you're growing up. Like if you're growing up in the city, things are moving relatively quick because that's how cities are. City culture kind of has a tendency to have a hustle to it. If it doesn't, something's wrong. Because it's supposed to work like almost like in theory, like a fine watch. You know, depending on how you look at it. So the new notes I'm going to present to you today is Generation X subsection 2. And bear with me, because I'm going to give you the dates, and you'll be like, wait a second. I would say 74 to 76 to 84, 86. And if you've listened to me so far pontificate on a bunch of random shit, like the Great American Whitewash and the fucking witch trials, all that stuff, this kind of makes sense. Okay? And it also explains a lot of the people that different mediums, and they get everything essentially, right? I'm trying to understand the details and the minutiae, why one thing segues to another. And the Zillennial category is an interesting category. So let me go through the notes. In this subsection of Generation X, the youth is divided. There is a harder division of the youth, city versus suburb. Classism is present earlier on. Bullying is pretty much standard operating behavior, right? And kind of promoted. The interesting things about schools is they used certain kids to keep rabbles in line. And they kind of fed into the ego, right? Especially the ones that rose really fast in high school. The popular model is a permanent fixture. The concept of Reagan-Nixon youth is a thing outside of the band, Reagan Youth. To the point that pop culture has generated Alex P. Keaton, right, in Family Ties. Underground is suppressed by both parties. And I'm pretty sure you can use the term corporatist at this point in time. And if you don't know what that is, let me add to clarity. I'm pretty sure I've said this before. Corporatist parties are the parties that are bought, meaning somebody's backing them. So you have the majority of the Republican Party, and I would say 40% of the Democratic Party, maybe even more. These are people bought and paid for. This is why this subsection is a little different than the previous subsection. Because we have a tendency to not like certain things by the time we go to graduate. And that's very important to note. Bands like Huey Lewis and the News and 38 Special. I even said this to a young metalhead yesterday. I said, hey, ever in your fucking life has everybody come up to, you know what, man, we should listen to some 38 Special. And he's like, no. I'm like, why? You don't know anybody with a full discography that's like acts like a human being, doesn't act weird, own some like Gordon Lightfoot and whatnot? No, don't get me wrong, I don't mind Gordon Lightfoot. And it's not like I'm saying 38 Special doesn't have its place. It's just, we had Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath and Alice Cooper group, the group, even Alice Cooper solo stuff, right? We had interesting bands. And we had even more interesting bands brewing right in the ground. But yet we're given 38 Special and Huey Lewis and the News and Oreo Speedwagon. And what the fuck is this? Like, Richard Marx is now a rock artist. We were giving the second part of Van Halen, which, I'm sorry, I don't give two fucks about, right? This is a thing, right? This all starts taking place around the same fucking time. This is what I'm trying to tell you. Design is an interesting thing. Now, this is speculative. But I'm going to explain in the next episode how speculation and conspiracy do coincide. But one requires academic and scientific model. So, education declines worse. The first wave happened with the generation, what did I call it? I know. Subsection, they stop feeling it. The harder decline happens, like people that I knew around my age were like, dude, it was fucking horrifying. Like people losing their shit. Like, understand, corporal punishment in the country tapered off in the 70s, but some areas, to my understanding, from the information I gathered over the years, it didn't necessarily taper off like officially till like sometime in the early 80s. So, without having the weapon of violence, that's essentially what it is, to keep the rabble in line, right? Rather than stimulating and educating, right? The idea was, I can't deal with this anymore. That and you have increased sizes of classes. Why? Because fundings, salaries, and a bunch of things are being cut. This is felt hard with this part of the generation. So the American culture seems to be a commodity. That's how it's presented to us, which explains a lot of satire and disrespect. The changing of schools and defunding of schools increase class sizes, which creates alienation and dysfunction. Like, I don't know about you, but if you've been in a class with 20 or more kids, that's problematic. As soon as you hit about 13, like I remember somebody saying to me years ago, when it comes to writing or reading comics or just actually television, any form of narrative, juggling 7 characters is very difficult, right? Think about X-Men, right? You go beyond that pale. You're trying to juggle like 10, 12, 13 characters. You have to really be very creative. And you have to give time management to each character to develop them, right? That's the idea. What happens is that when you hit about 13, 14 people in a class, the class develops its own subculture. So I have taught, I've done this. So you're in the class and you're realizing that you don't have full range. And not all the time is messaging being communicated well. So you can turn around and like figure out how to change that dynamic. And you probably can max it up to about 20. But once you get over 20, you deal with a whole different, now you deal with the mass audience. So you have to be somewhat entertaining, have a whole different skill set altogether. Right? And this is not, they don't necessarily train you like this. I always thought the passion for something, which is true. This is true. Right? If anything interests you about what the fuck I'm doing right now, it really is the passion to do it. And that's what's interesting. Because somebody's like, well, you must be getting paid. No, I don't get paid shit. I'm not expecting to get paid anything. Period. The drive for me to talk about this stuff is a natural drive. Because I notice it. And this is why I'm pointing it out. And that can be infectious. Right? The idea of like, I can geek the fuck out about music. Can. We'll make suggestions all along. That's the thing. And that passion and that push makes it compelling. Anything you're into, sewing, landscaping, there is an art, right? Anything you put in ideas and philosophies into, and passion, focus, is a good thing. It's a healthy thing. It helps you develop things. But it can become infectious for other people watching you and understanding that. Weirdly enough, monetary structure is way after the fact. After you get the intellectual thing, the fervor to do it, like it's after the fact. If it ever comes. I've known people used to do tons of drawings. They didn't give a shit whether anybody's seen them or not. And they were quite talented. You know, I know people used to play instruments all the time. They had no ambition to be in a band. That's not a thing. Right? I know some of the funniest fucking people in the world. never became comedians. But they did have passion and talent and thirst to make people laugh and being clever. That's a thing. So alienation dysfunction shows up. Now, granted, does this make for good fodder? Yeah, it does. It does make for great class clowns and a bunch of things. But for the most part, the idea of communication, critical thought. I mean, if you're wondering what education is for, it's basically, there's many stages of it, right? It's teaching the general overall in broad strokes, things you might have passion or interest in. Then critical thinking, and then research. I mean, your first 4 years in college is basically teaching you how to amp up that research, right? College, for the most part, is designed to go to your master's and to your doctorate. That's how it's typically designed, especially the first 4 years, undergraduate, right? Yeah, I just kind of, it's weird because it kind of gives you a crash course on how schools work, but that's just how they work. The goal is to get you to critically think about things and be passionate about something to be able to do research for it well and find your own nuance or insight into it. That's how it works. This, at this point in time, in this subsection, is being fucking crushed, right? There's a lot of kids that exist in the public school system and going, geez, man, I guess this is what we're doing. I don't know. And they can go through it, be squeezed through it, depending on how it operates, and not really get anything from it. Just like, by the time they get to secondary school, which is supposed to be privilege or something they're interested in, or supposed to branch off and give them the catapult into adulthood, they become disinfected. They're like disaffected. Not disinfected, sorry. They do that. And they're like, what does this all fucking mean? They start treating, again, like Biz Marquee, high school like a 3-year bid. They're just doing time. And that's fucked up. But the feeling is very there. Like somebody's asked me years ago, like, what was it like being in school in the 80s? I said, 2 good movies, if you combine them together, just smash them together in the fucking blender. No water, just fucking raw, right? Is Lean on Me and Teachers. 2 classic films. Advise you to watch them a few times. Because that's how it felt. And it was really with this subsection of the generation. The amount of divorces during this time increase. I come from a jacked up family, right? And at this point in time, that's like standard operating procedures. Like I always liked when they have the whole family and they're like, oh, well, we're a little dysfunctional. Really? So you have your car busted through your front living room because your mom's boyfriend, twice removed, wanted to go to war, your dad? No, it's not, that's not a thing. That's not a thing. Your dysfunction means that somebody feels sick in the family and you're following the normal family structure. So, it is. Shit isn't perfect. It's never perfect. My tendency to do stuff like this, like I'm explaining to you right now, is I lean more into than polishing it up. And I know you're like, well, this is a lazy way to do this. Is it? It takes a lot for me to generate myself to get onto this. And the reason why I'm mentioning that is because things aren't perfect, but things seem to get worse. Right? And the rawness sometimes helps that navigate, accepting the fact that the stuff you read, right? The stuff you ingest, you take in, there's so many fucking gatekeepers and editors of that material. Actually, that's appeal to punk rock. Because the rawer it is, actually, general rock, the raw the music is, the harder, like just, even the people who know how to play well, and they just have the passion over technique, it shows. So, the amount of divorce increases, the households begin to decline. Now, this is actually a thing. This is the thing where people are arguing overall. They're like, hey, wait a second. Now it's taking 2 of us to support a household, right? This is a result to the large supply chain that was established from the 40s, as far back as I can remember. Meaning that instead of the supply chain being domestic and accepting things that are seasonal, we started outsourcing to other countries. Don't get me wrong. Other countries need money. Other countries need jobs. Don't get me wrong. But being completely dependent on that, just so Americans can afford product because you don't want to pay them more, is fucked up. Right? One of the interesting things about the rich get richer, poor get poorer, is that rich are getting richer based on the fact that there is a displaced amount. We're on a budget, they're not. And the value of the dollar also increases into that too. That's really wonky. That's a hard, rough, broad stroke. I do apologize for that. I can probably get into that more in detail. I'm not going to do that right now. So, due to the supply chain and union busting, the standards of normal households kind of declined. Parenting was not present. The interesting thing about the Generation X thing is some people like, oh, being by doc. I grew up with kids that wasn't a thing. If you were told to be in by doc, by the time it turns dark, the lights go off, or lights turn on the street, then you had parents that genuinely were kind of giving you freedom, but you were still kind of on a short leash to a certain degree. I grew up where parents just, oh, you showed up? You know, that's a thing. So you were given almost carte blanche. And a lot of it is because they were exhausted. Or they were kids having kids. You know, we kind of operate like that. Like the idea of people wanting to put off having kids is a thing. And I honestly don't necessarily front on that. I can understand having kids early. I can understand having kids later. That's not the topic here, though. That explains why parents weren't necessarily involved. And you could think the previous generations, right? What was raising them was either the Joneses or boomers. And they were not, it was more hands off. Mom was running everything, right? Which I don't necessarily agree with. But that's how the operating system was for so long, right? Highly sexist. So, youth disconnection from recent history is a major thing. There was so much that happened up to this point that we're now not understanding it. So we miss in school, we miss Vietnam, the Secret Wars, East Timor, Laos, all that stuff, right? We miss the events of South America. We miss the critique of Watergate, understanding of Watergate. We miss the 4 major assassinations in the 60s and then some. Our history books weren't reflecting that. So unless you gained a hunger or interest in it besides school, you were not necessarily taught that. Right? Teachers sometimes would go rogue. They would start explaining it with candor. That was good. I welcome that. My interest in this stuff, because I kept looking at things going, well, that doesn't make any sense. Why did this happen? What took place there? Is a critical piece. Social engineering was safety in numbers. And the result of this, because parents were around or disengaged, right, led, in my opinion, led heavily to the gang issue. And some people have said, talked to around my age, like, well, that makes sense, though. You're right. It is. Safety numbers make sense. I get that. But it was literally socially engineered. Right? So everything's declining. And you start questioning, why is it all declining? Like, what did we just fucking miss? We get remnants of what happened in the 60s, that's probably the key thing right there. Right? We get remnants of, we're getting this weird music given to us that we are like, but I don't understand how this is not even close to this, but yet it's marketed heavily to us. Right? There is a switch in the 80s that takes place in the mid 80s. Clearly, Reagan was in for 4 years. Anyone that can fucking remember this will completely agree with me right now. They'll be nodding their fucking heads. There was a major shift in the 80s in American culture. Zillennials, we'll talk about this, are the segue between considered from 79 to 81 to about 84, 86. You see how that fits in there weirdly enough? Right? I'm going to make a statement, and I know this is a thing I've talked about with people. I honestly think they're the Generation X. They're the second half of Generation X. And what makes them bizarre from millennials is they remember the old way of things were. Because, again, the 2-year marker piece, right? That's one thing. Culture didn't shift that fast. You didn't have the luxury of erasing everything that, in theory, with Alpha, you can do that. Right? Given enough time, editing, cutting out, making more proxy Mandela effects. Now mind you, that right now is inner core conspiracy theory. But there's some interesting arguments. Sidebar. Fletch. The movie Fletch. Chevy Chase holds an Eddie McMahon envelope, Publishers Clearinghouse, in the movie. Now, whether that's real or a mock-up, clearly something's being communicated there in real time. There's a whole bunch of them. But life's interesting. So now you can edit things. So like in E.T., instead of the cops having guns, they have cell phones or phones or something else. That's what somebody told me. That's some crazy stuff. I haven't watched E.T. since it came out. Just put it into perspective. So this branch of like Zillennials kind of remember not necessarily the fake happiness, but when things were rough. And all of a sudden, you have 82 ribbons rather than the 3 ribbons that we started off with. Right? And it's funny because like the Tea Party, I guess indirect, I don't want to call Tea Party the MAGA thing. That's not, I don't necessarily think they marry well. I think it's a subsection. I want to give them a lot more grace in regards to that. But this is their argument. Like, wait, this is the standard operating procedure in how we engage life. Now you're trying to clean it up on us in a very strange way. That is a valid argument, right? Somebody should naturally stop using terminologies, inappropriate terminologies, or things once they gain knowledge and insight into stuff. But in the larger system, in the pop culture system, in the zeitgeist, not all the time is the knowledge gained, right? There's a concept called the culture of acceleration. And the reason why I think this generational stuff is being kind of overlooked is because America started moving at a pace that we couldn't, in theory, as a citizenry, keep up with. I think the people that wanted to accelerate everything and motivated the acceleration of everything, because capital and so on, fluid cash, movement of stuff, right? There's a lot of benefits for them. Right? And meaning them, the people that gained and own the system. There's a lot of financial benefits and growth for them. Think about that for a second. That's a thing. If all of a sudden I have 82,000 franchises in areas that I didn't have, maybe I had 2, within 15 years, I quadrupled, multiplied it to factorum this. That's a thing. And now I'm making ridiculous profits, not only from selling people franchises, which is fucking crazy, but also off the kickback from the franchise, right? And that's just one example, right? Population, people are going to fuck. So population is going to grow. So you want to basically accelerate things so much to keep up and maybe surpass and dominate the population. And this is where I go with the argument I made last season. I literally said, there was a period of time the consumer culture ran past them stalling growth. And that's how our wages ended up going up. Now, again, I'm going to say this. If you live in a state or in an area that is still having the same wages they had 20-something years ago and haven't at least tripled or doubled, you're being taken advantage of. That means you might be living in a great blowjob economy. Like, oh, you want more money? You better suck really well, right? You better give me more for my dollar. Because that's how I play this whole fucking game, right? That's a thing. So Zillennials are aware that there was a switch. They're given this, do you know where your kids are? New wave of parenting. Treating kids like precious artifacts. Creating anti-programs in school, like DARE. And a lot of it was just to knock out the other kids. Be a knockout. I'm going to fucking, I'm telling you, the kid's 2 years older than me. He did this. He had a knife. He had, I'm not saying he should have a knife in school, but you know what I'm saying? It was designed for that. They experienced change of the guard in the school system, like Generation X. They're watching the school system change. And that does affect, if you're in school 6 to 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, for what? 3/4 of a year? That's going to have a profound fucking effect on you. That's not even extracurricular activities, study groups, before school activities, or summer school. That's not even including that. So the school itself is now changing everything. I'm already telling you the second part of the generation is not, the history is not caught up. So we're not necessarily taught to critically think about things. In the 60s, they changed everything to focus heavily on the new math, right? And math plays an interesting part of this. Actually, the way the information is presented plays interesting. Even English has changed, right? Those are two major focuses. History, social studies, certain other things get kind of the backseated. And the arts, oh, fuck. It's funny because they were in the process of purging the arts. Music. Why? What do the arts do? I've already explained to you. The arts connect people. Doesn't matter where you're from. And developing skills in it, it's strange because the job market requires it. But they act like that's not a thing. They also experienced part of the witch trials. So when I talk to Zillennials specifically, they remember the Two Live Crew. And some remember Judas Priest. They don't remember Dead Kennedys, the John Denver, Dee Snider thing. Right? The Great American Whitewash begins in the mid-'80s. So television changes. And they remember, because early television shows were still on reruns. So they're like, when did this happen? Millennials have a tendency to chase the new. And that's another thing, too. Like, I grew up on tons of reruns of I Love Lucy, Honeymooners, and indirectly the Flintstones, Hanna-Barbera. Like, there's a lot of things I grew up on that were perpetual reruns, right? Like, one of the things I'm going to get to eventually at some point in time, hopefully it's this season. If it's not this season, it's the beginning of next season, which is Amazing World Gumball. And cartoons, modern cartoons. This is also pushed. Now, it's interesting because kid cartoons become an interesting narrative in the 90s. But at this point in time, they remember when everything didn't really matter. And you can watch things non-sequentially because that's how information is presented to us. Now, Great Whitewash is interesting because if you didn't have cable, all the creators went to cable. unless the new reinvented Fox during that Great Whitewash is going to be hard and edgy and have a lot of creatives. So if you're ever wondering how Fox Network itself gained an edge over everybody, that's how it did. Because everybody was playing it really, really weirdly safe. Right? So they remember the time, the changeover. And the more they think about it, the more they go back to experience certain things, they realize, hey, there's something happened here. And they're not wrong. So, computers are for the rich during their watch. The part of Generation X that was being prepped for the end of the world. So, Zillennials still have that end of the world thing. So, I don't know if you know this. Most of Generation X were prepared for hard shit to happen. We've been engineered that. It was amped up and actually really fear-mongered. More of like, how many times Christianity during the course of my existence had a rapture day? Probably different denominations. It wouldn't just happen recently. This has happened. And you would think like certain other religions, when they come to the end piece, that they would close shop. They don't. And I'm not necessarily saying they should. But some bold like, it's the end of days. Tomorrow's will be the last day. Sell everything. That's fucking crazy. Right? Play it as it lay. If it's going to be the last day tomorrow, deal with life. If it happens, it happens. I mean, I don't necessarily understand, but we were geared up to think that way. That's why certain things didn't surprise us. Certain horrors in society horrified society, but didn't surprise us. It's like the interesting thing about growing up in Massachusetts is you knew about Father Porter. You know, and the whole child molestation and, you know, touching and all that shit with the Catholic Church. You knew this was happening because it was already being talked about. What surprised me is that it was isolated. It didn't make the national news as one would think. It didn't make the national news until the larger cases broke in the early 2Ks. But we were kind of prepared for just bad. Shit to fall the fuck apart. You know, like the Roots album. It's, mind you, mad-libbing there, but good name of an album, right? So, this part of Generation X was being prepared for the end of the world due to the parents living their lives. Information is not readily passed down. That's a thing, too. So, not all information or topics become taboo. There is an interesting poll around the Great Whitewash is like, you can't be listening to this anymore. Satanic panic and all these things. That's a thing. Right? And that has effect on information provided. Health class was health class. You had to engage health class. There's comedies from that era that talk about the ridiculousness nature of this. Yet it became critically problematic. You also got to understand that there's also the rise of pro-lifers and the church groups that they come from. The same silent majority existed in the 70s, right? They're gaining foothold around this time. This is all taking place. So not all the time do parents feel safe giving their kids information anymore, which isn't being freaked out about yet. That happens later on. That happens like during Gen Z. But in the end of the millennial transition to Gen Z. But so kids had to kind of figure it out. You also have another thing too. They remember when television becomes a major focus. Because it does. And that's when the critique of like, why aren't you out riding your bike and playing with sticks and doing all this stuff? Like, it sounds like boomer shit, but it's the truth. We were just adventurous. We explored everything. Why? Because it was more or less hands off. And again, safety in numbers. So if there was enough of us, shit popped off. We managed it as best as possible or got an authority to help us. Here's what's weird though. If you take all the options away from these kids, and this happens, and these millennials kind of understand this even a little more. Like the skateboarding thing. Other stuff, which I'm not going to get into. It's interesting because I want to touch on these concepts but not dig too far because I can go on a tangent, right? But this was what we did. The crazy injuries, crazy art, street art, all this stuff. We did that. That was standard operating adolescence. And no, these are criminals creating that deviance. Through whatever programs you had in the school, officer friendly there telling you, yeah, you can't be doing that skateboarding thing or the freestyle BMX work, right? You can't be doing that. No. And it's not respected. You have a whole generation of kids that's kind of shat on and kind of demonized. Well, he's not listening to you, he's listening to news. He's listening to Metallica. What's wrong with him? And yes, Metallica back in the day was actually, even though they were on a major label, they were still kind of not on the radio at all, which is another fucking topic, right? Again, whitewash, it had an effect. It affected more millennials than zillennials. It did have an effect on zillennials. Then what I'm presenting to you, the end of Generation X, but it had a fucked up effect on millennials. So give me a second. Millennials. So I have it here 84, 86 to 96, 98. Why? So if I'm proposing to you that Zillennials is the latter half of Generation X, then Millennials actually beginning in the mid-decade. So the Alex P. Keaton, I don't mean to get on the character, but if it's showing up in television, television at the time worked in the scattergun effect. The goal is to get the broader audience. So the character has to exist if they're going to flesh them out. They has to exist in the normal culture in order to entice people to engage it. Right? This is a thing. Not all the time is it like that, though. So some of the 70s sitcoms kind of cut things up differently. And they kind of broke molds. Nothing on Roseanne, great comedian, so on and so forth, up to this point. She's a little off now, but for the most part, back in the day, she brought that 70s edge to it, which kind of makes sense because it passes off. Because understand that whitewashing thing really only takes place between the 80s. It kind of ends. It kind of eats shit. Like, when they lost control of, like, the radio and bands and what kids like because of this bullshit, it's interesting. Boy bands didn't work the way they did with millennials. Let me explain. So there's a mall circuit and a soft circuit for engineered artists. How to explain that? These are pop artists. Popular? Well, it means popular. I mean, somebody must like it. No, there's a laboratory version of this. Popular means that somebody went from obscurity, did their root work, and gained notoriety over time. I mentioned the Beck thing because some of these artists will get in with producers or in labels, and the labels only want them to sound a specific way to make money off of them. This happens a lot. That's one road. The other road is this mall tour road, which, again, can't reference it enough. Bill Hicks' work, you got to cover it, right? He references that these mall tours existed, and this was a thing. This also becomes even more focused when Disney, nothing wrong with Disney, well, there's a lot of things wrong with Disney, but they started branding this concept. There's a show called Kids Incorporated. Take these polished kids and artists and put them like in this weird, like, military fast track to become pop stars. That's why the term pop music is a weird term. Because pop music could mean Elvis. Not a fan of Elvis, but Elvis, who did the work, to Britney Spears, who did a different work, right? Not saying no talent. That's not what I'm saying. But it's definitely a different road. It's contracted work. It's really fucking with their childhoods and getting them to a level that they formulaically feel will work. This happens around this time. And what upset this, in my opinion, was Generation X. Millennials kind of accepted it. So what failed with Generation X became really popular with millennials. Right? A good example. Judge shows in the 80s were fucking weird. The only one that was genuinely universally accepted was People's Court. That had been around since the 70s. Small Claims Court stuff. Not bad. Kind of dope. Great theme song. The other ones, not as much. The standard for Generation X was like Donahue. Merv Griffin. Which is kind of like more or less, it's another show. I can't remember the guy's name off the top of my head. There's a lot of famous people on that show. I should do my homework with that, but I'm, again, tangent. I'll eventually get back to you at some point in time with that. A lot of this format existed, but it ate shit in the late 80s. Because Geraldo Rivera got a fucking chair thrown at his fucking head. There's also another thing that happens. Wrestling is on the rise, and wrestling adopts a soap opera structure. So this all happens around that time. So the shows that were pushed in the network, really only for the television daytime people, because you still have the housewives at home, right? Because protected class. You have them at home, or whoever's home, really, are watching this stuff. And they have the daytime stuff has a different tone than the evening stuff. But the pop culture stuff kind of fails. Boy bands kind of fail. Real music kind of jumps ahead, so on and so forth. The millennial thing seemed to embrace, well, so I'm talking with Gen Z, and I'm like, so boy bands, no. I mean, you have One Direction, and BTS, but they're like, honestly, that's not really our generation. That's more or less millennials. And they made them popular, even though they were a lot older, still jumping on that bandwagon. And I'm like, you're kidding me. Like, is that a thing? Now, I'm not sure if this is universal. Granted, it's anecdotal information given to me. But that's a possibility. Obviously, NSYNC Backstreet Boys was a millennial thing. And they were a hell of a lot more successful to the point where they end up bringing back the New Kids in the Block. The fuck? Right? That's a thing. That was a dead concept. And only in the Midwest did that somewhat thrive. Same thing with really bad hair bands. So, first generation to be brought indoors. They are pushed into television, whitewashed rather than films. But films end up becoming a thing for them. Their horror movies are nuded, but underground film does affect their landscape, like I just said. So, Spike Lee, Quentin Tarantino, Kevin Smith, Ed Burns, all these people end up affecting their interesting choices because they exist as kids when that's booming. Interesting enough, it's more nostalgia based for them now because it's definitely within the realm of their childhood. Because if by 92, they're typically around 7 years old, 9 years old. Think about that for a second. Right? Television has duality. It has a new wave of creatives because it started to lose kids. Like Generation X really started losing interest in television. It became, we would just spot check things, typically, if we were still watching it. For the most part, we found, again, more interesting shit in the outside world. This changes during the child era. And there's probably a lot of data on that, and I don't have that. But I do know having children does change things. And I'm not going to deny that. And that's a whole other subject. I'm not going to get into it right now. So they are the only new wave of creatives. It started to lose kids. Critical programs either jumped into wrestling, soap opera driven drama models, which is being hooked on drama and crisis is a thing because it channels surprise, shock, and adrenaline. That is a thing. That's a natural high. So if you ever wondering if you live in a house where people want to constantly fight with each other and perpetually escalate it, the great term that comes out of the, I guess, millennial Gen Z is toxic. But that chase for that drama is a thing because we're shown it on television. Jerry Springer, Ricky Lake, which Ricky Lake's show initially was normal. She was following basically the Oprah model, right? Even Oprah got out of pocket before she changed the whole format in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s. The only critical programming is really in the news or the news channels, which, again, you don't realize it's cause and effect. CNN and all the news channels like Fox News and all that stuff doesn't become a thing. CNN existed in the 80s, but it really, general data, what's considered critical, important information you're supposed to learn from the larger zeitgeist, is now channeled onto that. They change models at some point in time, especially with the normal news, because you have local news and it leads into the national news. And I'm pretty sure it was around this time they changed it to ratings-based, which at this point, for the longest time, it wasn't. News was just news. We're giving you data and information. And it was designed as such, as a public service. And then at some point in time, the company's like, no, it has to make profit. Get beautiful people on there, motherfucker. Has to make profit. I don't care if she's selling dildos. Right? I'm not saying the news has gone that bad, but yeah, in the future, you never know. So that's the thing. So all critical thinking is either placed late at night. Remember, these kids are artifact kids now. The idea of artifact babies. So Precious has to go to bed by a certain time. So mom and dad can then watch critical news. Dateline, or whatever, 2020, whatever the fuck it was back then. Cable versus no cable. That's a class issue. Because cable by this point in time is now expensive. I mean, it always costs more. You're paying for television, that's a fucking ludicrous concept. People laughed at this at one point in time. Right? And with the paid piece, always is this. The back door always is no ads. I will eventually address the advertisement thing at some point. But, yeah. No ads. So you're going to pay for no ads. When these budgets get bloated, they're like, no. So it becomes a class issue. I didn't always have the privilege of cable. For large portions of time. Shit, I gave up television sometime around this time. And when I was younger, I did not realize this is why I was giving it up. People have asked me, to defend this, obviously, because, how come you're not watching television? You must worship the devil, because television told me so. Or, there's something wrong with you. It wasn't just me. There was several of us that just stopped watching it. It was not interesting at all. This is why I think the hard creators are brought in. I'm going to tell you this again. Fox channel undermined network television because they did something radical while everybody else was changing their standards to meet the whitewash. Where was Batman? 92? Fox. Where was X-Men? Fox. Up to that point, the largest narrative we had in cartoons was G.I. Joe. And even then, it was loose. Transformers kind of caught up. But the innovation in cartoons happened because of Fox and cable. But Fox is free. You didn't require cable to get Fox. Think about this for a second. I'm literally telling you to be critical about this. This is a thing. So, because we're at a time where now we're seeing the effect of things. And nothing against the Batman 92. That shit's dope as fuck. Right? The Justice League, the Superman stuff, I'm Generation X. I'm still watching that. So if I'm having kids, I'm now presenting kids this stuff, right? Think about that. You literally have what was generated in the 80s and ostracized since the 70s. The underground pour into the mainstream because of Generation X. We were already invested in this thing. I will go on record. Like, people think, Nirvana. Don't get me wrong. I like Nirvana, right? Faith No More is the real thing. In my opinion, was the tipping point. It changed things. By the time Nirvana showed up, it was like a guaranteed, okay, this is the knockout punch. The Pixies, rap, like, literally, they already had it in commercials. They gave you the Vanilla Ice and the MC Hammer. You know, that's the real, they reinvented rap because they didn't want to call it rap because they've already given it a bad connotation because the media, right? Gangster rap, right? Rap is an oral thing. So you have this, and they rework the culture, which is hip hop, to a genre. Okay, arguably you can say, well, if that's the case, then the Herbie Hancock Rocket is first hip hop. Why? It's because it's blending different genres together. That's how the hip hop becomes a genre, I guess. It's confusing because I grew up where you don't call rappers. You call rappers MCs because that's what they are. They're holding the mic. That's a thing. And to me, it's more respectful. It gives a unique title, gravitas, right? You know, any which way. So the underground lands into the mainstream. And the underground itself, because they suppress. Again, this whitewash happens to people like, well, fuck you. And it suppressed the market. And literally, record labels were not prepared for this. There's a great documentary called Hype that I advise you to watch. As far as I know, I think it's still on Tubi, which is a free service. Check it out. If you can get a copy of it, watch it on whatever source you have. They're dealing with this shit in real time. This documentary was not forged not that far after these events. And it shows you the machine at work trying to compensate for lack of control. Because that's what happens. Lack of control. I mean, you go from Geffen Records to David Geffen Records. Because even he had to figure out, like, I have to follow this money this way. So that's the thing. So the underground pours into the mainstream, but it is shaped by the corporate lens. So for millennials, their structure comes after dealing with the chaos. Again, 92, they're like 7 to 9 years old. So when they're becoming teenagers, it's in the late 90s. This also explains the contrast between Woodstock. There's been many Woodstock homages and celebrations over the years. The one where I'm referencing is 94. There is a sharp contrast between 94 and 99. Here's something funny. So if you went to any shows, rap, rock, and it's funny because Generation X is like, fuck it. Here's what's weird. The first part of Generation X is still like hair metal. And I don't know about that rap. There is still that piece there. It still exists till today. Fucking strange, right? But it's interesting. Because I'm going to make a clear statement at the end of this that might clear that up. So, the styling guided by millennials is through a corporate hand. Now, corporate hand at the time, take in consideration some of these places are inherently like conservative. Because the rise of conservative, I mean, they tried selling us Rush Limbaugh at some point in time on television. That's a thing. Because you had Morton Downey Jr. And they sold us that for a period of time. This man screaming at people randomly, trying to mirror the style of comedy that Bill Hicks, Dennis Leary, late 80s comedians, Sam Kinison, are kind of doing, but almost in a brash with the Phil Donahue model, right? Again, Geraldo getting hit, Mr. Jerry Rivers, getting hit in the head with a fucking chair, changed the landscape. It spiked hype. And that's what's being injected at that point in time. So there is a corporate lens being put on the larger piece. And when the music falls apart, I mean, Polygram, to my understanding, ended up signing Downset, which is a great band. But they were not Def Leppard. So they were just signing bands they didn't fully understand. So they get dropped relatively quick, which is kind of sad because the album's not pushed as hard. Because then they realize, oh shit, we're into this. Right? Because they didn't understand hardcore. They only understand things through the lens that their fellow corporatists are giving them. Like, this is Satan worshiping. Really? Really? This is Satan worshiping? Same statements across the board, right? Well, this is gangsta, right? Because, yeah. Very strange thing. So it pours in the mainstream, but for millennials, they get almost this weird corporate lens. Like, I'll give you a good example. Voltron exists. Voltron's been recently redone by, I'm trying to remember the name of the company. DreamWorks? DreamWorks. I'm pretty sure it's DreamWorks. It was on Netflix. It ran like 8 seasons altogether, or 8 volumes more or less. It was a great polishing of the old one. It's really good. Advise you to watch it. I like the old one too. So don't get me wrong. So that's worth. Understand, those aren't American cartoons though. Those are repackaged Japanese or work. That's coming over here, China, whatever. I know, like, oh, you should compare China and Japan. No, just it came from the East. That's probably the best way to kind of put it into that framework. So that's the thing. And they reworked for American audience, like how Bluey's reworked for American audience too. Like, we now can't have that. Again, there's gatekeepers there. So there's a show called Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, which for Generation X, it's like a big bag of shit. Nobody gives a fuck about it. But for millennials, it's not. Because it puts together a bunch of ideas that existed in our culture previously. Like Spider-Man from the 70s, the first Spider-Man series movies we were kind of given. It even has that whole Wonder Woman feel, coupled with Transformers, coupled with a Voltron theme. So for us, it was like, this was hokey. Like, you could do better. And animation was improving so much, but it really wasn't for us. It was for the different generations. Same thing with the railroading of the mall circuit again. They built up that so hard. They built their audience via Disney Channel, via indirectly Nickelodeon. Like, any venue was giving to this, right? This is the thing. So their rise shows up probably around 96, 97 when it first comes on the circuit. Like, this is a larger, more aqueduct system. And it's not as much affecting the cities as it is middle America and the suburbs and rural areas because it's being injected. This is where you get into where I can get into the discussion of sectioned off selection of information. Like, I've talked to people from different parts of the country, and they weren't given access to like certain things. It wasn't on their cable service. It wasn't they were not kept from it. It wasn't even a fucking option. Think about that a second. And this is people that were younger than me. I'm like, that's crazy. Why? Because they recognize at some point in time this spreads. It's like when they're trying to pigeonhole rock and roll or proto rock and rhythm and blues and eventually rock and roll, right? Literally going to start a whole race war over this because that's, a low-hanging fruit. Let's go with this. We won't appreciate the music for the music being. Give the artists what they need to make better work or keep continuing their work. No, that wasn't a thing. But they learned this mechanism back in the day through broadcasting. Not making that up. You can go back, literally. Actually, one of the coolest things is the Wall of the Worlds thing. Orson Welles performing that before station IDs. That shit was fucking chaos. Great piece of American history, right? So, the millennials given more of a corporate lens because Generation X seen this shit before the corporations dug their heels in, right? Accelerating is so strong that context is either missed or not fully understood. Understand, millennials' parents are Joneses or Gen X, but subsection 1 of Gen X, right? That's the thing. Think about that for a second. Computers in millennials' households are standard, so they're the first ones that start engaging technology and not being looked at as a rich motherfucker, right? That's the thing. They see the fallout. You might not understand the context all the time of 9/11, the Great Recession, COVID. Columbine was shocking to them. And you're like, well, it's shocking for the whole nation. Yeah, here's what's weird. If you ask a Gen Xer, a true Gen Xer, did that surprise you? Seriously, if you ask a true Gen Xer, did school shootings, stabbings, horrifying shit surprise you? They'll tell you no. If they don't, they must have lived in the middle of a field by themselves and not completely oblivious or not right. Because for us, this was communicated really, really, really fucking well. To the point where it shows up in cinema. And remember, I told you, films are different beasts. For a long time, they're not television. So they get encoded quickly. They capture the zeitgeist or the American culture a lot faster than television does. Appearing virtuous seems to affect a mirroring television piece. So preparation, metrosexual, these concepts show up with millennials. Right? It may have been pushed by the pop stars, but it becomes a standard operating procedure because there's new marketing. Here's what's dope. Gen X gets to the point where androgynous becomes a thing. Unisex becomes a thing. I'll give you a good example of how this still hangs out in our culture. Converse, and whether Vans wants to admit it or not, is pretty fucking unisex. You can get Converse anywhere, and it doesn't matter whatever the aesthetic is of the shoe, because they sell as unisex. That is common sense. There's a show by the Replacements called Androgynous. This is practiced through punk rock and underground. This is a thing. Why? Because you're making females and males blend as a culture. This was a Generation X thing. Millennials kind of adopted it, but then there was a hard shift. Another weird thing is they're very optimistic at one point in time, like bubbly optimistic, because they start seeing all the positives, because they're coming of age when things seem to be going well, and explosions of .com and all that stuff. However, they mirror television, probably more so than previous generations, because previous generations recognize television is not up to par yet. But there's enough creative work in television during, again, the great whitewashing of America, that some of the stuff does translate as cool. That's the thing. The plus side of it, nothing on millennials. I mean, but the idea of understanding previous stuff isn't necessarily there. There's, unlike the parents before, was explore, fuck around, and find out. Millennials were like spoon-fed information. When I realized this was a different generation is when I watched the car seat and the protectionist structure. Now, should have always been there? Yeah. Do I think child abduction, Adam Walsh, and all that stuff rose to that? Yeah, I do. That was a thing. There's a movie called Black Phone. And that movie is like loosely accurate for a period of time. Loosely. It's one of the few films I've seen recently. I'm like, it's capturing it relatively well, right? The other part, so the cause and effect would be protect your children, plus the rise of pro-lifers. Like, that's a thing. So kids become inoculated with this whole bubble. And that bubble hits them hard. So when events happen in real life, it's fucking them up. Where Generation X kind of was prepared for bad shit because the model of fucking around and finding out. Like where this is potentially going to happen. Right? It's ingrained in us. You know, it's because you drink out of the fucking water hose. Shut the fuck up. Okay? If you have a hose and water's coming out of it, more likely as a kid you're drinking from it. Okay? That's a thing. Bottled water. Giving kids bottled water. Like, just think about that for a second. There is a protectionist thing, inoculation, like keeping them separate and encased out of harm's way. And that had an effect. Right? Their icons are television-based rather than neighborhood-based or social-based. So they're measuring things differently. They don't even realize, like, am I watching this? Zillennials realize, this is not right. This is fucked up. They may even be cynical about, because they remember the downfall of fucking New Kids on the Block. What do you mean downfall? They never downfall. They were so constantly successful. No, they were kind of laughed at. They were hokey as fuck. You know, unless you're like a 9-year-old girl. So, last one. Generation Z. 97 to 99. Now, what's funny is kids I've worked with, we were not necessarily identifying these as being kids of the late 90s. But they're the transitional kids. They're Gen Z for a fucking reason. Right? So 97, 99 to 2007, 2009, roughly. Now this, give or take, I think millennials has the 2-year piece. Yeah, so they have like a 2-year gain. So it's like a plus minus. The numbers are really weird here. But they're definitely they're the last generation. So their parents were probably Gen X and earlier millennials. So millennials born in like the mid-80s might be having these kids. You're like, wait a second, they're still being in high school. What, people don't fuck in high school? There's been no history of ever underage pregnancies. Shit, most of the country was based off underage pregnancies earlier on. Oh, she's old enough to bleed. We must wed her, sell her off to the highest bidder. That was the thing. Wait, no, what are you trying to suggest? Sexism. Patriarchal systems say, hey, guess what? We need to auction her off. That's what we're officially doing, but that's what we're officially doing. Isn't that the whole concept of marriage, right? That's how we base it kind of loosely. We'll wrap it in love. That's a detour. The 90s are not fully understood by the Generation Z. Generation X if not completely quiet, it's quiet now. And the reason why I can honestly say this is if you were engaged in cinema, music, comics, books, the arts, whatever, around this time you probably definitely fucking and having kids. And that will then hit your money. This affects your bottom line. And Generation X grew up in the fear culture. So jobs at the time were like, you either shut the fuck up or leave. Oh, we might fire you. You might live in a trailer down by the river, right? That was the thing. So we were constantly pushed hard to go. Because we still remember how the country functioned prior to the modern era. So the cutoffs are interesting. So I'm going to give you it from the perspective of comic books. Because I still kept reading. And what happened was that around this time, sales dropped tremendously. This is before the movies. So I think Blade was probably the only movie out, and that was successful. Batman already ran its course because, Tim Burton didn't direct all of them. So this is around that time. So the general audience kind of dropped off. And sales dropped. And if you were reading comic books around this time and realizing the modern era of comic books was just gaining foot, it's around the time of Marvel Knights, all that stuff. Like the first wave of Ultimate Spider-Man. All that work right there went unnoticed kind of at first because they didn't realize this was about to happen. So they weren't reading. So the sales, let's say, comic book that was selling 100,000 copies, now selling maybe 30,000. And the company adjusts to that. Well, printing maybe 35, 40, whatever. It all sells out. And then maybe if more orders are coming in, more interest is coming in, you get second prints. Typically, you got trade paperbacks. There was a bunch of people reading at the time on trade paperbacks. That was standard. So when the general audience catches up to comic books, because at this point in time in comic book history, the modern era definitely kicks a fucking hole in the wall. There's a lot of really good books around this time. Writing changes drastically. But comic books always been ahead of the curve to a certain degree, even with television, right? You're like, what? The comic books? Nobody reads these silly books. Every time you think comic books, if you're old and you're thinking you never engaged comic books, you're probably thinking like 1960s silly fucking Spider-Man comic books, right? I'm not saying it's silly, but the way they're written is more spoon-fed, where in the modern era, it's not. It's angle, perspective, palette change, tone. It's really interesting shit. And they could do it faster than television can. So those books are worth some money. They have some heft to them because a whole new era of people came into the effect and affected the comic book industry. But the sales weren't high. So people going back to it after the fact, after they get to, stop making more money, stabilize their family, they go back to it. Now they're realizing, oh, I missed all these fucking books. So value goes up, right? That's the thing. No, I don't have any Ultimate Spider-Man. I sold that shit a long time ago. That's the thing. You're like, hey, wait a second. No. But it's a good book. If you haven't read the first, Bendis just ripped shit up in that comic book. It was great. And the current run is even funnier because the irony to the current run was nobody bought the first issue. It sells the fuck out. And people are like, wait a second, there's another Ultimate Spider-Man. Very funny. This affects everything. This tells you the audience dropped out at that point in time. Films are affected around this point in time. There's great films that come out in the early 2Ks. And for some reason, they're kind of overlooked. And the film industry gets weirder by 2015, 2014. Now it seems to be understood something is not right. So, Bush 43 the whole administration changes, shifts of math and curriculum. You get the Common Core, standardized testing throughout the whole country, which changes a lot of things. It also isolates Gen Xers and older millennials in their skill set to teach their kids. It offsets everything. Right? At this point in time, their books are actually now presenting information based on modern history, where, like I told you, Gen X wasn't necessarily given that. Millennial optimism shows up at a high rate because the idea around this time is also treat everything with a smile, engage it fully. You know, those fuddy-duddies, negative people, Gen X, they're being engineered against that template. So we're more critical. Well, they're more critical of us. That passes along. So the change in academics has us not fully engage our kids. The change in the way they're presenting information. One of the things that was told to me by Gen Zer was that it's weird because they just kind of accept things. The whole generation seems to accept things kind of the way they are. They're trying to understand why they're fucked up, but they're not given the proper context. Because at some point in time, that data is kind of lost. It was kind of massaged out with millennials in a very strange way. There is a cause and effect to this because millennials, I applaud them. They wanted we want the world to change and change towards us. We're giving all this shit. I understand that. Again, they're given 9/11, the Great Recession, COVID. Millennials had to deal with all that. So did Gen Z. Gen Z quickly realized, oh shit, what the federal doing, what the state is doing is going to affect us really fucking quick. Like, yep, everything's kind of a time bomb. For them, computers are standard, by the way. And again, there is more engaging in the context of computers. They're now leaning in more. Millennials are seducing them more into the idea because millennials were the first ones to have it as a daily piece. It's almost a guaranteed item in the household. Gen Z, it is guaranteed and you have complete access to it via phones and so on and so forth. Gen Z grew up in post 9/11, post Columbine world, so their schools, like, they don't even know that the metal detectors and the way the schools operate weren't standard. School shootings weren't standard. They weren't necessarily, hey, you know what? I'm bored as fuck. I think I want to go to school and wipe everybody out because I'm a piece of shit. That's a thing. Right? They grew up in that world. This remnant. So they mirror Generation X to a certain degree, except the difference is Generation X is trying to say, and older millennials are trying to say, hey, you need to figure out, think on your feet. They try to give them pieces of information. Something happened during millennials that have a hard resistance with Generation Z. They'll take it, but they take it in a very strange way. Again, if you look at it from a matrix metaphor, the matrix is already built. So they're the first ones in it, test running it. Going, wait a second, is this exactly how everything is? Not really. So if you're a parent of a Gen Zer, little side advice. Teach them about social constructionism. Because that shit is fucking important. If you don't know anything about it, learn about it. I will eventually explain that in greater detail at some later episode because there's a great book about it. Social Construct of Reality by Burke. Pick it up, read it, audiobook it, whatever the fuck you need to do. Because the more they understand that, the better their footing will be. Because that's the praise I've gotten from a variety of kids across the board in regards to this. Like, question things. Understand, don't be afraid to not say, what is that? What does that mean? What is the plus minus? And not only that, but also asking several police people. Right? That's the thing. So, context is not standard in their world. Therapy is standard and accepted as the norm. Sexism is rejected. Homophobia is rejected. Racism is rejected, which is, oddly enough, progress. Right? Gen X and millennials should be teaching them this. The internet is not all-knowing and is problematic, and video games eat up your life. Why? Was video games always a thing? No, they were a pastime thing. They became more of a thing as generations progressed from 87. Right? Generation Z has a problem of thinking they know, but presenting that they don't understand. That's the thing. Generation Z is also marketed to by influencers, which is problematic because they don't fully understand the other side of the fence. This is the role of Gen X. This is why Gen X should probably no longer be quiet. I'm going to end on Gen Z, and the reason why is because COVID fucked them up. Your judgments of them, your understanding of them, and their weird quirkiness, COVID fucked them up. Like the one person told me, I went from 6th grade to high school. Not the older ones, not the ones born in the late 90s. Although I imagine it affected them too. But the ones that were already in the school, already doing some of the major milestones in their lives, COVID shut everything down. A direct effect from dismantling the CDC or reducing it. They watched over 1 million people in the population die, specifically the elderly. Take that in consideration. And they had to figure out how to navigate that and how to navigate panic at a very young age. They're also raised on soda pop stars, the American Idols. American Idol is like the amped up, forced version of Star Search. Right? Star Search was a Saturday programming that older people watched. But we're told that these polished singers, these people, are genuinely great, I guess. If they're so great, put the work in, work your way up. Right? It's so great. How come one of the large companies snatched them up when they were kids and, mall tore them? Exactly. But we'll give them a quick fix with television programming. I'm going to state this, and this is towards the end, and I apologize for this running as long as it is. But it's done. I'm done with this. My speculation, in my point of view, subsection 1 of Generation X isn't actually Generation X. What? Who the fuck am I? There is a major cutoff with somebody at the age of 51 right now. There is a major divide between somebody that's 50 or 49 to somebody that's 51, 52. You'll lean more conservative with the first part. Again, the weird Alex P. Keaton concept, right? This is a thing. They're more apt to listen to yacht rock. They're more apt to listen to... They're just a different beast altogether. I'm not saying they're wrong. They showed transition. They showed... Literally, Lou Reed, the Velvet Underground. They watched the rise and fall of Woodstock Nation. They had to endure Watergate. Both start with W, which makes sense. So I'm going to say, in my honest opinion, that the generation between 64 to 66 to 74 to 76 is Generation W. Right? They're a different beast. They are the generation of what's called Generation X right now that could probably not graduate high school and get a career. Right? Or graduate high school and get a career. Or go to college and it was cheap. Or endure college that didn't hold your credits. Like, they're that generation. They're the ones that probably jumped on the computer piece really quick and made a lot of money. Now, that does cross over to Generation X, but not as much. By the time you get to the Zillennials, you already have the electronic plantations, right? The thing that's covered in office space, right? I'm saying this because it puts things into perspective. So you're dealing with Joneses, which have more in common with Generation X. And Generation W are more leaned in via boomers. They're more influenced by that. And Joneses. It's really strange. Because, like, I'm so sure of this that I would love to test this model and run a lot of sample data. You know, it's funny because I was told about the Jones generation in an article, and I knew they existed, but I always thought they were a patchwork generation. Like, meaning that they were a bridge between one generation to the other. I didn't realize they were a full generation, but the more I kept thinking about it, I'm like, they loved rock and roll. That was a thing. So did boomers, to a certain degree. Right? But just Generation W, from 65 to 75, we'll leave it 64 to 74, right? This is a different generation than Generation X. They watched the decline. They watched Watergate. They watched the crazy 60s, and they always want to stay neutral and always lean conservative, which is really strange. Well, because Nixon was in office when everything kind of like, Republicans, whatever. Oh, we had a big boom in the 80s. Really? Yeah, because they were breaking the backs of fucking unions. And they were stagnating our wages. Yeah. They're not that critical of that. And when you mention things to them like the hair bands, they fucking love hair bands. They can't let that shit go. Not all of them. This is a broad stroke. Whereas Generation X, literally, punk rock shows up in full form, not proto-punk. Right? Garage bands consolidated, early glam consolidation, proto-punk consolidation, hard rock consolidation, early goth rock consolidation, all into Generation X. And the second part of us, we're always taught, that didn't really exist. I remember, like, growing up, knowing Black Flag existed, and when you mention it to people, they're like, Card Trick. Don't you like Sammy Hagar? Like, seriously, that was a thing. I remember watching somebody get beat up for wearing all black. That was a thing. All black clothes. Right? Because you're not decked out in a fucking crazy day glow fucking neon. Right? I grew up when shit was fucking terrible. And people just were savage towards each other. And this all gets changed and whitewashed in this really weird Christian glaze, evangelical Christian glaze, is pushed onto all of us. And I will tell you, Zillennials remember. So they're part of our generation. And I'm making that bold statement. And Gen Z, as shocked as they are and left, and they're in the workforce just trying to survive and making sure they have stuff, they isolate to a certain degree, but they should be a lot more vocal. We should be telling them the vote is the vote. We should be telling them, do what you want to do. Make your life the way you want to make it. You don't necessarily have to have kids right away or at all. Argument for having kids is the uniqueness that is you is left behind in another person. That's more of an anthropological perspective, biological perspective than an actual reality. It's hard to raise kids, right? There's a whole topic I'm eventually going to cover on that. But so understanding these generations, the boomer, anything from the Joneses on, even what I'm calling W right now, have more in common with boomers. No, against boomers. Have more in common together than previous generations prior to Joneses. Why? Because we've seen American culture dive and get dark. We're still enduring it. As I am talking to you and recording this right now, we're seeing the most fucked up shit happen. And our generational differences shouldn't be a thing. They should be open dialogues. We should be appreciating the arts across the board. We should be teaching the arts across the board. Why? Because art is our culture. We brought things to the world that have literally fucking changed the world, intellectually and artistically. That is our commodity. And they act like it's not. Why? Because one person might generate something that is so fucking dope that all of us will buy it, and it makes that person wealthy. And that's not the channels they want to have. By design. That's why when people make it through and make money, those loopholes get attacked right away. Think about this. Any which way, thank you for enduring over 2 hours of my bullshit. Thank you for enduring both episodes. I'm going to try to make the next episode around an hour because I have to explain a model. And so it means the blocks will be shorter. Currently, what I'm reading and what I'm invested in is I'm rereading Hunter S. Thompson's Fear and Loathing in the Campaign Trail 72. I'm towards the end of that. Comic books that are really dope right now, I may have already said this, Exquisite Corpses. Can't suggest that to you anymore. I think it's already on issue 6. Interesting comic book. The Ed Gein. I don't even like the monster thing. I thought Evan Peters did a good job in the last miniseries. Not the Dama, but it wasn't the last one. The last one was about the Menendez brothers. But that Ed Gein one right now, if you're hearing negativity about it, I question the person that's giving you negative shit about it. There's a lot of cool ideas put into it, and the threading and the commentary is interwoven, and the effect of this man and his insanity and his isolation and the result thereof is quite interesting. So I would suggest that that's on Netflix. Anyway, I'll let you go. Take it slow. Till next time.